Now that you've learned a little bit about the different sections within a research paper, I know some of you already know, kind of have an idea, but that video should have really drove all those points home. Some of it may have flown over your head, and that's totally okay. There are some things we haven't touched on yet, but I just want you to get a basic understanding. Most nurses who are involved in research at some point in their careers don't know every single detail about these research papers, all the nitty gritty. Okay, all this nitty gritty stuff is for like the statisticians, the PhDs who are manning the whole research effort to begin with. But I just want you to have a general idea. And one thing that we as researchers do, nurses all the way to the principal investigators of the study, is something called a literature synthesis matrix. Some people call it a literature review, even though that's kind of a research effort by itself. But we make a matrix on an Excel spreadsheet where we break down all the different components that we find within an article. Once we've narrowed down the articles that we want to use, in order to kind of spread it out, have an over aerial view of all the components, and then you can kind of compare and contrast with your other studies to make better decisions about which articles to use and or to just have a more comprehensive understanding of the literature you do have and what information to use for your ultimate research efforts or your study. So to create a matrix, you start in Excel, and there's, depending on what components you're looking for, you'll have all those different components listed up here in each column. And then down here, you'll have each research study with all that information listed throughout. Different studies, different research efforts, different matrices will have different components to look for. But for us, this is what I would like for us to look at. So you'll leave the first one blank when you make it. And I should be able to post this on Canvas so you guys can just go with that. But if you guys do decide to kind of do this, you should, on a Google Doc, then you can do it that way. But I'll have you start with the year of the article, the author's last name and first initial, et al. If there's a lot of articles, which usually there will be. A lot of authors. And you can adjust the size as necessary. And then the title of the article. And when you do type in the title, and it goes on and on and on like this, what you'll do is you'll click into the cell, and there's this little thing called wrap text, and that brings it all together into your little box, so it's not running in and you don't have to make this super duper long. So that's that. And then if you can find within the article a problem statement of some kind, a PICO question or a hypothesis, basically the statement where the researchers define exactly the issue that they're addressing, you'll identify that. So I'll just put that as PICO. It may not be exactly in PICO setting, okay, or formatting. This could be, so I'll put problem statement. And we'll go through, I'll go through an example article with you on here. And then the level of evidence. And so this directly correlates with the triangle that we discussed in class, the triangle of evidence, the hierarchy of evidence. So if it's a randomized controlled trial, that's like, well, if it's a meta-analysis or systematic analysis, that would be like a level 1. Level 2 would be RCT. 3 so on. And then the study design, if you are able to identify it. I'm not going to be like an extremely hard grader. I don't expect you to understand every single component of these studies, all the different designs that are out there. We only addressed, the most common. If you're able to identify it, that's great. And then I want you to identify the key variables. So really the independent and the dependent variables, if that's pertinent to your study. And then talk about the population a little bit. If it is a randomized control trial, or if there are groups and a sample within the study. So the way that's identified in a matrix like this is, say the population size was 109. You would say n equals 109. So 109 total participants. And then talk about it a little bit. Well, to make it easy, let's say 100. There were 50 men, 50 women. And then talk about their sampling methods as well. So population / sampling. So 50 men, 50 women, randomized from a senior center or something like that. Or maybe it was not randomized from a senior center. It was 100 people, 50 men, 50 women from at a university. Talk about those methods. How did they get those participants for their study? Again, I want to wrap that text. And then testing methods is another thing we haven't touched on yet. And we're not going to dive extremely deep into it. But it's very explicitly mentioned in a study. And I mean, even for me as an undergrad, when I was a research assistant, I hadn't learned anything about this, but I was given an assignment from the PI, the principal investigator, to fill something like this out for all her evidence that she had found. And it wasn't too hard just to find the testing methods. It's very, you can already we'll talk about how you can kind of find it. And again, I'm not going to like really super duper hardly hold it against you. I just want you to try your best. And then 2 more things. The findings. So summarize to me what the findings of the article were. It was found that among the 50 men and 50 women, 100% of the men felt this way about this thing, and then 100% of the women felt the other way, blah, blah, blah. And then finally, last thing, implications for practice. So this is the section that you will discuss why is this important. So if certain people found said intervention to feel and act differently than the rest of the sample, then that might mean something for how we practice as bedside nurses or how we operate as a hospital, etc. So discuss what the results of this means for us in healthcare. What do we suggest? Why do we care? Why do we care about this? Okay. So let's look at this example article to get there. All right. So the year of the article, right there. So 2020. The author, we're going to go with Eshaghi. These are all Iranian people somehow. I feel like Iranians just constantly do research because there's nothing else to do in Iran. And then et al. Oops. Okay. This kind of helps you understand, like, because like I suggested that you save the articles in your computer with the last name of the first author and the year. Then when you go back to refer to this, to be like, oh, what was that one article about that situation? I feel like that'd be so good for us to put in this one section of our project. You can just quickly look back. Oh yeah, it was this person. And you can relate it directly to the article you saved. So that's why I have that there. And then title. Just literally copy and paste. Wrap. Done. Okay, so the problem statement. So we're going to start with this abstract, right? So the objectives of this article: PMS is a common disturbance by women of childbearing age. Aromatherapy is commonly used as CAM to treat it. The purpose of this study is to quantify and summarize the effects of aromatherapy on premenstrual symptoms. So that's the purpose of the study. It talks about methods, all that, how it found its research, blah, blah, blah. Usually something more of a Pico question would be in the intro. So let's look for that real quick. So they're talking about the gap right now. To our knowledge, there is no meta-analysis evaluating the entirety of the clinical literature and this effect of aromatherapy on PMS. Okay, so that's why they're doing what they're doing. The purpose of the study is to quantify, blah, blah, blah. So the problem statement pretty much is all of this. To our knowledge, there is a gap in this situation, and therefore we are going to fill this gap. That is exactly what this is. I'm going to copy and paste. There is no plagiarism when it comes to this, okay? Because you're not going to publish this. You're not going to take credit for this somewhere in the world of research. This is simply for your own. So look, you're running. This is simply for your own just ability to understand and organize and pick apart your evidence. So you put that there. Now the level of evidence, this is a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. This is the bestest of the bestest research in the whole wide world about Iranian PMS and aromatherapy. But women are women, no matter what part of the world they are in. Obviously, being an Iranian woman is very different from being an American woman, so I'm sure the results could be different if we were to repeat the study here. However, it's a good start if we don't have any such meta-analyses here in the US. However, it's an English article, so I imagine that they are contributing to an overall knowledge as opposed to Iranian-specific knowledge. But that level of evidence is going to be number 1. Study design. It's a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. So we can say pretty much all of this. That's our study design. If it were just a randomized controlled trial, that's all I'd put, randomized controlled trial. If it was a situation where they just tested, or they used this among a bunch of college women at one college, all the women in that college, that would be a quasi, for example. So that would be our study design. So basically, level of evidence and study design go hand in hand. So my key variables in this situation, let's take a look at maybe the abstract will give us a hint, but, they only included 8 articles. See, now that makes me think like, oh, well, that's not a lot. So it's like a low-key meta-analysis, but it's probably better than whatever they had previously. So the key variables are aromatherapy and PMS symptoms, right? The purpose of the study to quantify and summarize the findings of effects of aromatherapy on premenstrual syndrome. So we're going to go with independent variable as being the aromatherapy, right? Because my PMS symptoms are dependent upon the use of aromatherapy or not, or versus traditional methods. And then my dependent variable is PMS, right? So the population and sampling. So you're going to see all this in the methodology. So they have an eligibility criteria. That's kind of something you might include in there. See, they even assess the risk of their bias in there. Let's see. We're looking for sampling methods. So eligibility based on predefined eligibility criteria. 2 independent investigators reviewed. Okay, right. So this is a meta-analysis. So population sampling doesn't really apply to this situation because we're not looking at a direct randomized control trial. It's a systematic review of randomized control trials. So each randomized control trial, all 8 of them, are going to have different methodologies of sampling. But they review the eligibility criteria of the different studies, that they have their own as well for which studies that they even reviewed. But it looks like they didn't really analyze those 8 studies' methodologies of sampling. And it doesn't really look like they include some data on how many. So really, for a meta-analysis such as this, unless it says anything other elsewhere, your n would be 8. It'd be 8. So n equals 8, and then you would just say 8 RCTs. Specific, and you specify this, specific sampling methods and population not defined. Okay. Otherwise, if it were an RCT or a quasi or whatever, it would say n equals 100 women in this situation. 100 women from blank blah 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 university or something. Now, testing methods. Their testing methods are, so they're actually listed up here. This is a testing method. The I-squared test was applied to measure heterogeneity. That's one way that they use to measure their sample, essentially. And you would just put that in there. Anything with the word test next to it. Again, we didn't really touch on this yet in class. But if you are able to identify it where they mention something along with the word test, that's usually something you'd put under testing methods. And then ultimately our findings, which again, we can find right in here in the abstract. So the quantitative synthesis of evidence found that aromatherapy decreases PMS scores. Bam. So PMS scores, I forgot to include one thing. If you are able to identify the instruments, and what I mean by instruments are things that they use to analyze specific data. So for example, PMS scores. How are they measuring PMS scores, right? There's got to be a specific instrument, a tool that they're using. So let's go in and look at that real quick. Usually it should be separated. Results. Let's see. The effects of aromatherapy overall score of PMS. Where do they discuss this? Usually all that stuff is listed. Let's see. Okay, look. The random effects model was used to assess the weighted mean difference between values of PMS symptoms. So that's one clue. I'm wondering if there is a specific tool or scale that they use to measure PMS. I'm shocked that I'm not seeing anything specific. This is the first time I'm looking at this article, to be honest, so. So here, by the way, side discussion, usually most articles will show this diagram of how they came to their final. So n equals qualitative and quantitative. Okay. So they usually will show a flow diagram of how they came to their final N value for their sample. So they identified a total of 253 articles in the beginning. Through database searching and through other sources, I couldn't find anything. To finally, they screened some using their eligibility criteria that they defined earlier. And then those that only provided full text articles, only 22 had those. So that's what they didn't even go out of their way to pay for or find the other articles, but that's okay. And then finally, it looks, so they said that the N was 8, and this must have been that 7 of those 8 were quantitative, and then I don't know why this says N equals 7, but then their final up here says N equals 8. Anyway, just go with the abstract if you ever run into a discrepancy like that. This is the same thing that we're making now. They made their own here, where they've picked apart all of the literature that they found. So sometimes they start with a whole reference. See, there's the year, age, design, the intervention. I also forgot to add that in here, since this is a meta-analysis. So if your article has an intervention, include that somewhere in here, maybe right before. You can put that in key variables. I would say like your independent, if it's an intervention, put in parentheses, this is the intervention, because the aromatherapy is the intervention. Let's talk about that. Just more on the article, more on there. So I'm trying to figure out the PMS scale, what they've used for that, if they defined it at all. Well, let's just finish this part, I guess. So this is the findings, right? So they found a decrease in PMS scores. They also found a total psychological decreases total psychological symptoms of PMS. Anxiety of PMS, depression of PMS, and fatigue of PMS. Compared to the control group. We can add that in there. So what that's saying is that between two groups of women, or menstruating people rather, that are experiencing PMS, one group used aromatherapy and felt better in all these different aspects. And so implications for practice is the last one. And this kind of, the conclusion kind of touches on that. Aromatherapy is an effective tool for the relief of PMS symptoms. And they're also suggesting for future researchers, additional randomized controlled trials with different durations and different essential oils should be conducted to confirm our findings. So that's valid, that's fair. So aromatherapy is an effective tool for. So we can put that, I would say, in findings. Implications for practice. I'm a nurse. I want to bring this in. Hospitals / inpatient units that take menstruating patients should utilize aromatherapy as a quality of life improvement measure / intervention. I mean, long story short, right? Basically, maybe my PICO question is, how can I I don't know, improve menstruating patient satisfaction in the hospital or something like that, because they're going to be the ones on top of everything else they're going through. Now they're menstruating, they're in pain, they're irritable. There's only so much we can do, so maybe we should have aromatherapy as a specific intervention for those patients. That leads to more questions like maybe we need a care plan for menstruating patients in the nursing world, but that's a whole other PICO question. So that's what you would do. I would like for you to do this for your 2 articles that you found. Instruments. So the instruments, that would be where instruments. The instruments is what would, like, if I could find the PMS scale or whatever they're scoring PMS on. Usually it's all written in unless they just made it up based off some symptoms and how they feel on a scale of 0 to 10 on those symptoms is my only thought. One previous review evaluated blah blah blah. However, the study reviewed focus on Iranian countries on mid and major. How are we measuring PMS in this? I'm really skimming really hard, just because I'm recording, so I feel like I'm under pressure. But so I mean, here's the methodology too of how they search. So they use Publine, they use Cochrane Library, Scopus. This is the keywords they used. So use these things to kind of help you with your research. Eligibility criteria, randomized control trials or crossover conducted on females. So this is also part of your females with premenstrual syndrome. So this could be a part of your population. Specific population not defined. Well, we have a population now, so specific sampling methods not defined. We'll say So the sampling method is really, because this is a systematic analysis again, so you could just talk about the inclusion-exclusion criteria here if you want. This should be maybe inclusion, exclusion criteria. So I think you could do that as well, especially if it's a systematic analysis or if it's addressed in there. I mean, that's part of the sampling methods, really. Studies reporting mean and standard deviation of symptoms. So I guess they just really went off of what the studies defined as PMS, but see, they could have done a better job at defining. I guess that's their operational definition of PMS. Let's see. Let's get rid of that and then say we do that. Okay. I think that's pretty good. Let's say NA not defined. Done. It may take you a little longer to complete this. I used to do this as an undergrad, as an assistant. But then this way you can always look back and be like, oh, well, we had this study that had this information. This would be good for this part of our study. Bada bing, bada boom. I think it would be better if you guys did it all on a Google Doc. But I also wouldn't mind if you each individually sent me your own Excel spreadsheet with your 2 articles that you found. It ultimately doesn't matter, as long as I have something for each of you. So maybe here you can put, if you do decide to do the Google Doc, you can put name. So if you are Mina Tariki, who made this one, and you are the person in the group, and you made this first one, and you made the second one, then put that there so I know, so I can give you a grade, okay? This is what you'll kind of use later on for your project. And this will be kind of your assignment due for Sunday for this week, okay? Again, reach out to me by email. We can talk about it over Zoom. This is more so just very much so a learning experience for you all and nothing more. It's going to be a practice for you to This whole thing is just you practicing research, because you'll probably get involved more in depth later on in your career. Hopefully some of this made sense. Again, let me know if not. I will post this part on Canvas. And I think that's it from my end. Otherwise, please watch the videos and please complete this assignment. And then next week, we'll talk more about some research stuff that's on the exam. Okay, and then thank you guys again very much for the beautiful gifts and for the beautiful words and those cards. I think I definitely started to tear up a little bit. Thank you guys so much for making me a professor and for being awesome students. I couldn't do it without you guys, so thank you.